We've had all manner of technical issues with audio, so we're a bit paranoid.
You'll never sing the same if your teeth ain't your own.
Yeah. And I'm glad to say I had that recorded.
Excellent. Outtake. So, what do you think of The Office, starting off?
Lovely. I was just admiring your irrigation lines, all the heads. It's slightly overwhelming, and
there's a lot of heads out there. We've been upgraded this week from the boot room at Royal Liverpool to my office, which is bolted to the house, and it's very, very small.
Next week we might get invited inside.
Screaming kids and dogs, not a good combo. But yeah, this is the office, Ryan. This is where the magic happens.
You must be out on the golf course.
The flurry of magnets. We try and split our time, but yeah, it's a nice little place. Sam's behind the desk in the hot seat.
Yeah, lording it over you.
Ready to go with our next guest that we promised you last week, Mr. Ryan Noades from the Addington. Ryan, can you confirm your name and position?
Ryan Noades from the Addington. I'm the
of the Addington.
I'm the managing director at the Addington. My family owns the golf course, so I think my Instagram says co-owner.
Ruler with an iron fist. What's the old
benevolent
Abercrombie?
Dictator? I think.
What's the Abercrombie line about?
Benevolent dictator.
About being the suggestion box.
Yeah, that too. Suggestion box.
Purveyor of fine socks today.
Oh yeah, deal socks.
Mm-hmm.
I think
was that subconscious or was it?
I got up in the dark. We've got a 5-month-old.
Dressed in the dark.
Yeah, I just grabbed for something warm.
So you reach for your Sunningdales and accidentally put on
the
dicks. Welcome back, Badgers. We've been playing today, so Bledge and I have been joined by...
Playing being the operative word for you, maybe not me.
No, I'm not sure. The wind was blowing and we had one shower, didn't we? We thought... I sent Ryan a text yesterday and said, are you sure you want to come? Because it was chucking it down, wasn't it?
It was horrendous
miserable.
Yesterday.
But he said, no, it was fine. And we were largely okay, weren't we?
Yeah, it was a beautiful day. We thought we were going to get rained on, but we got lucky.
Well, very lucky.
Well worth the trip.
Very lucky to have Mr. Noades come up on the motorway.
Yeah, enjoyable. Yeah, grateful for your company and good to play the course opposed to working on it all the time to kind of see how things are progressing and what we need to do. That's why I've always got a really good excuse for being a poor golfer because of my head's elsewhere. So,
before we get into it properly, do you think that's important, Bledge, to actually play the golf course?
No, 100%. Yeah, I think I was quoted on Joe Galotti's podcast for saying that a good chef always tastes his food or her food, and I massively think that because today my head was buzzing with things that we need to do still, and I was actually came away really happy with the course. I think it played really well for this time of year. You know, we've been chucking a lot of sand everywhere. And the team have been working really hard and doing things really well, and Paul, my deputy, keeps the place going like a well-oiled machine, keeps everyone cracking on all the time. So it's great to see staff out there always working and always pushing and getting jobs finished and going to the next one. So that's very pleasing. But yeah, massively important. I've always been a believer that, I mean, there's so many great greenkeepers that are not golfers, but I always think it gives you that extra edge if you've got to understand the sport, understand how it plays, and be able to not go out there with greenkeeping tools, stimp meters, clegg hammers, but go out there with an actual golf club and a ball makes all the difference.
Yeah,
but it's debatable. You know, a lot of people would maybe naysay that, but that's just how I feel about it.
How often are you going to see other places?
As much as I can. I actually prefer playing other places than, and whether that be a walk or playing golf, but. I played quite a lot of nice places this summer, and it really, really helps. And it doesn't always have to be a links course because you're always picking up things from. I mean, I was down at the Addington. Myself and Liam Brown, when you invited us down there, we had a great time there, and it just gives you a new zest for your job when you get to play other places and see how they do it. And as I say, it doesn't have to be links because there's things like furniture or if you're visiting the shed or the office and you see the way that the team are managed, and that gives you the extra tools to do your job better. So yeah, I mean, you're the same with coming here, aren't you?
Yeah. No, well, just while we're on the subject of Hoylake, it's today. I think you're being modest. I think that's probably one of the best conditioned courses I've seen in a long time.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. You might have told me that in the course. I might have played better. That's nice to hear. As a team, would be chuffed to bits with that, because, as I say, we all work so hard, and there's a lot going on just now. A lot of disruption to get to the final goal, and I think with that disruption, the course can go backwards, but we always try and keep the turf as well as we can, and we're still keeping in mind that the golfers are still playing, as well as putting in all the infrastructure at the same time, which is it's quite hard to juggle both. But yeah, it's good to know you think that. So I can't wait to come to Addington so I can give you the same feedback.
No, we'll definitely have you down. We need to interview Kurt.
So, Ryan, tell me a bit about your background then. So, the Addington, but also a few other golf courses in your stable. So, how did that come about? What's the business there?
So, my father was in football, and originally there was a training ground, and they had this issue where the kids were getting in trouble, say in the afternoons. They'd have finished training sort of 1:30, 2 o'clock, and the idea was he wanted a low impact activity where they could get the sort of young stars, let's say, to go and have sort of team bonding off the pitch after practice. So the idea was you'd build a golf course right next to a practice facility, and then you'd sell membership with people that wanted to play next to the footballers, and then the footballers would be kept out of trouble in the afternoon. So that he found Western Golf Club, which was down the road from the practice ground for Palace back in sort of 96, 97. But by the time Western opened, I think he sold Palace about sort of 18 months later. So that was pretty short-lived. But that was the idea. And then he retired into golf, really, and sort of fell in love with that and ended up building 2 more courses and buying 2 others, the last of which was the Addington in 2006.
Yeah. So golf was just not part of his life. And obviously it was chairman of Crystal Palace and owner of. And then is that the sort of segue? Before that, he didn't do anything at all.
He probably played a little bit, but certainly it was a pastime he took up much later in life. And then he was, I think, probably never below sort of 15 or 18 handicap. So it was always very much a social thing. But yeah, it was very much a retirement activity.
Obviously, then you come into the business, big fan of golf. And when did you realise that of the portfolio and of the golf courses that you guys owned, the Addington might be slightly different from some of the others?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot recently. It's quite hard to realise how you got to where you are today. I mean, it's been a good 15 plus years. I think it was quite a slow realisation for a few reasons. One was the course was just so overgrown. And we slowly, one of the first things we did was just take out all the rhododendron that were down the sides of the fairway. So as well as the trees, there were just bushes at ground level where if you missed the fairway, and the fairways are quite sloped, so if you didn't hit a ball with the right shape, it would just be running off the fairway into the side of the hole and disappear, and you'd never find your ball. I remember a story actually when shortly after they bought it, they sort of sat around the table, and I think there was 5 or 6 pros from the other clubs, and they went around the table and asked how many balls everybody lost. And I think the average was something like 12. So it was, pretty penal. But we start to pull the rhododendron out, and you start to see the landscape for what it was. And so that was the start of the realization process. And then the other thing that's really helped is the digitization of archive material. I mean, the clubhouse burnt down in the 50s, and all of that stuff's been lost. And I don't think we'd have been able to do this if it had been done earlier, because so much of what we've found has come out of all of this digitization over the last 10 years and social media. And there's a lot of amateur archivists that are going into like the National Library and finding all this material that is, you'll get one picture turn up every month, but over years now, the last sort of 5-10 years, that's amounted to an incredible amount of material that's allowed us to realize what the place was and to really inform the process going forward for how we're going to restore the golf course.
And that's helped with getting permits passed, etc., with the local councils or for restoring it? Has that been an issue at all?
That, touch wood, that hasn't been a problem yet. The golf course is pretty much as it was. That's one of the unique things about it, that the architect, Abercrombie, firstly, most architects would build the golf course and then move on to the next golf course. Abercrombie built this and then lived on site. He built it in 1913 and
because it was his course that he proprietarily owned, wasn't it?
So he wasn't the owner. He was certainly a part owner. It was a very small group of wealthy, powerful individuals in London that commissioned Abercrombie to build them the most exclusive club in London. And initially, it was really just meant to be for members of the peerage. So earls, dukes, lords, viscounts, marquises, I think the other one is. But I think World War I sort of scuppered that. And by 1919, the course had been built, hadn't yet opened. And then it seems to have, at that point, been much more open to the public. And then they built a second golf course. So, but Abercrombie's then lived there until 1935. World War II breaks out. And then the lady that comes into singular ownership, her father had sort of amassed the shares after Abercrombie's death, and he died quite early and then left the club to her. And she then had the club from the 60s until she died in 2004, 2005. So, her sort of mantra was, don't touch the golf course. It's Abercrombie's masterpiece. So we're not touching it. God looks after the golf course. So from 1935, when Abercrombie died, nothing really changed during the war until this lady takes over. The course is pretty much unchanged, untouched, really, since Abercrombie was alive. So that's quite a unique situation for a golf course. Most of them have been changed, altered in some fashion over the last 100 years. So with permitting, we haven't actually really had to put sort of a shovel in the ground and move any earth. Like, everything is there. We're just peeling back the layers. And so the brunt of the work has been tree removal, which we're doing with the proper licensing from the Forestry Commission.
How many trees have you removed in total?
We don't ask questions like that.
Quite a lot. We can edit that out.
With more still to come.
The acceptable amount.
Yeah. And no TPOs as problems or anything like that.
Well, so I'm sort of giving the secrets away here, but if you work with the Forestry Commission, you're sort of a step above the local authority. So that's a sort of national body that you deal with. The TPOs are generally we're getting quite technical now, but the TPOs are put on by the local council. So once you get to the felling license from the Forestry Commission, in theory anyway, that supersedes the TPOs.
So all these years, she didn't change the architecture of the golf course, but of course the trees grew in and vegetation and nature takes over. So the last few years, obviously been working with CDP to try and peel back these layers. What's been the biggest change up to date? I remember you saying once you've got to get the canvas ready before you can start painting on it. So what do you mean by that? Well,
that's Frank's term. Yeah, you've got to get the canvas ready before you start to paint on it. So that's really a reference, I think, to the tree removal. The landscapes there, all the bare bones are there, but we need to widen the corridors. The trees and the bushes were everything was so narrow. You couldn't see the topography, and you couldn't really play the holes the way that they were designed. There was just one shot you could hit because the corridors were so narrow. So by widening the corridors, you can give people more options. But in terms of sort of then painting on the canvas, the 18th hole, for example, we've just rebuilt the bunkers there. There were trees over the areas that the approach bunkers were, where they were located. So you couldn't really see how to do those bunkers until those trees were gone. So you have to do the trees first. You can't just design, think about how you're going to do the bunkers until you can actually stand on the tee and see what you're looking at. Yeah. So you got to widen the corridor first, see what you're working with, and then make subsequent decisions.
Yeah. Because a proper strategic golf course back in its day, because it was Abercrombie and Colt as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And are there any other golf courses, to our knowledge, where those two work together?
Yeah. So, and then more than that, I think, and someone might correct me on this now, but I'm sort of putting it out there. So hopefully someone can correct me or not. Colt was obviously in a school of architects with Allison and Mackenzie, and then Abercrombie was Fowler, Simpson, Croom. And to my knowledge, no two architects from either school has done any course together as any collaboration. So this is the only collaboration between the two schools of architecture in the world.
Yeah, fascinating.
Which is quite a nice mix. It's before they both formed those companies, but there's it's quite an interesting design in that, I mean, Abercrombie, against the grain with probably all the other architects, but let's say Colt in particular, would have designed the par threes over the most dramatic ground, and Abercrombie really didn't do that. He put the par threes in areas where they got you to higher ground, and then used the drama to play the longer holes over, which gives the course its own unique feel that other courses don't really have, because there's so much drama on the long holes compared to other golf courses.
Well, that's interesting specifically. So 12 and 13 then are probably two conflicting styles of that exact architecture, aren't they? The 12 is the famous hole going down, up, and it's like a roller coaster, short par 5, isn't it? And then 13, what does Henry Longhurst say about the 13? It's second only to the...
best inland par 3, with the exception of the 5th at Pine Valley.
Well, that's a pretty high accolade.
Yeah.
But in terms of long holes playing over like the craziest topography that you could imagine, how would you describe, for the people who haven't been, the landscape of the Addington, which must be pretty unique?
Yeah, well, it is quite hard to describe if you've not been there, but it's sort of, very severe terrain. Jurassic is what comes to mind, but it's, I mean, the 12th, for example, you've got a fairway where it's a 485 yard hole. For 200 yards, the fairway's fairly level with the tee, and then it drops about 60 feet down. And then from there, you've got about 130 yards to the green, but the green is at the level that the fairway was on before, so it rises up again another 60 feet. So it's a real sort of roller coaster terrain. And it's just great fun to play.
Yeah.
And the whole following that was was quite heavily featured with your before and after shots that you were doing, where all the trees were pushed right out and the rhododendrons. That for me, I think, was the biggest kind of thing that captured my attention with Addington and said, Jesus, actually, they're making big differences here.
Yeah.
We
could maybe share that photo, Sam, probably at some point.
I think the Ryan's permission, that is a really, because it was just, even till recently. So I first went maybe, I think it was right during, it must have been summer 2020. I remember it was really hot and I was there doing a drone survey.
Yeah.
Like the difference every single time I've been there after, it's just been like going to a different golf course.
Yeah.
Like the rate and the scale of the change and the ambition. And do you think that if this wasn't a proprietorly owned club and it was a members club with a green committee and whatever else, do you think it would have maybe fallen in terms of vegetation as far as it did? And do you think it would have then ever been able to be brought back to the level that you want it to get back to?
So I don't think it would have ever got back to where it's going. Whether or not it would have got to where it went, it's anyone's guess. I mean, there are, hopefully not, but also there are so many golf courses that are member owned that have slipped.
Yeah.
I think the 1960s and 70s. There's obviously sort of post World War II. There's plant a tree in 73, plant some more in 74. There's just the USGA sort of at some point, I think they talking about good golf being tree lined, not being this idea that you shouldn't be able to see another golf hole from the hole that you're playing.
Yeah.
And then the introduction of, and the sort of more ubiquitous use of sort of automatic irrigation systems. It's just, I think it's just a perfect storm that's then led to, I mean, once you get some saplings take over, and I think World War II did this, because we got some photos where you've got essentially like an open heathland, and then 10 years after World War II starts, you've got sort of 10, 20 feet of trees and shrubs. And, they've during the war, presumably, they've only been maintaining the fairways, greens and tees, if they've been maintaining them at all. So after that, it's sort of the woodlands, just off and running then, and people don't really see it happening. So it's the perfect storm of irrigation being introduced, and then this idea that you should have these sort of perfect corridors, and then you end up with tree-lined golf holes, which are enormously expensive to bring back.
And also not good for turf health as well.
And I think that's a slow decline as well, when you see sort of like, the holes that presumably used to drain and now they don't anymore, and people wonder why, and then they throw more water and fertilizer at it to try and improve the situation. And
turf's getting softer.
Yeah. and it's and
More
then,
leaf litter, more worm casts.
yeah.
And just the exact opposite to what you're trying to achieve in a heathland. So, I mean, I know you well enough to know how much of an interest you take from our side of the industry, with the turf industry. Like a
I'm
massive
trying
amount.
not to now. Now we've got Kerr.
Yeah, well, Kerr Rowan is so your course manager, Kerr Rowan, I went to college with when I was 16. She's probably the person I've known one of the longest in the industry.
Yeah.
Fantastic course manager, good Scottish lad, obviously. And but you do take a lot to do with the turf side. I mean, we've talked for hours and hours on the phone about stuff, and I really like how you're inquisitive about it because you care so much about it. I mean, you are a proper club owner badger, Sam. Would I be right in saying that?
That's very fair. Accolades awarded.
That's right. How much do you enjoy that side of it? And do you feel maybe since Kerr's taken over, you can take you'll never take a back seat from that, though, will you? You love it too much. You love learning more about turf.
Yeah, I think I'll always want to know what's going on. I think I've always got an interest at that level. I don't. I think but there's reassurance now that we're in safe hands, and I think I'll always have interest in greenkeeping, but I'm very aware that also it's not my job, it's not my expertise. And I got a text from a greenkeeper the other day saying, "God, you'd be a pain in the ass to work for," and and so I'm trying to be very conscious of that. So I'm interested in it. I would give the thing I think that first spurred me into it is I read that was it Jim Arthur or
Jim Arthur, yeah, Practical Greenkeeping,
but also
there's a copy of it just over your shoulder there.
Okay. I would hear everybody in the greenkeeping industry. This is sort of 10 years ago. I was a lot younger then, and then everyone's talking about fescue and bent grass. And yet everywhere I went, and I tried to start learning about how to sort of identify grasses, everywhere I went, I would basically just see POA and see people more or less maintaining for POA, but all of them at the same time seemingly talking out both sides of their mouth saying, we want fescue bent. And really it was just me asking questions going, sorry, this doesn't make sense to me. I'm but a humble surveyor, as sort of my first boss used to tell me. It's like, can you please explain this to me in layman's terms? And then, where you don't get answers, I suppose you just try and find answers yourself. But it was never me on the mower or trying to do any of this stuff. So, I'm very aware that it's not my role, but I do take a keen interest in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, things are going in the right direction now.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, the place is coming on leaps and bounds.
Mm-hmm.
But the same with the architecture as well. I mean, there can't be many people quite as passionate as you on restoring and true to the principles of those original guys who built the course 100 years ago.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. It's I think I'm just incredibly lucky. It's right place, right time, because I don't know if I didn't have the Addington, I don't know that I would have been able to foster this passion for those subjects. And I think certainly without me, the Addington wouldn't be going forward the way that it is. So it's just lucky that I'm there, and the course that I happen to be able to work on is the Addington. So, right place, right time. I'm just incredibly lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you talked before about the cultural change through the 70s, 80s, and golf courses. That same term that you said before about every hole is an amphitheatre, that's something that we heard a lot over that thing that fortunately now I think we're moving away from, certainly in other parts of the world and here at a rate that could be a little quicker, but we're getting there. But the thing I was going to ask is, you've moved to short grass, a lot of short grass on the golf course.
Yeah.
Fairways that have gone from maybe 25 yards wide to, in certain cases, what's your widest double fairway now? It must be.
Well, the double fairway between 2 and 4's got to be close to 200. This is largest single fairway. I think the 12th is going to be about 120 yards wide.
Yeah, and
that's phase one.
I think some people will listen to that and just say, "Oh well, it's very nice talking about this stuff, but it doesn't really work in practice." They just smack the ball so far nowadays, and yes, at the very top end, of course, I can absolutely see that. But for the people, your club members who enjoy the golf course, the visitors who come and play, how have the scores changed? How have people's perceptions of the golf course changed?
Well, first I'll say the Addington's it's severe ground, so you need more width because the ball's moving on the ground more. So maybe you wouldn't go quite as wide on a flatter course. But having said that, nobody likes losing golf balls, and the wider you go, what we've found at least, it seems completely counterintuitive. We've removed trees, we've removed rough, we're shortening the rough where it is, we've widened fairways, we've made greens bigger, and yet the scores have got worse. So now we're talking about average scores. More birdies, more pars, more doubles.
Yeah.
So bringing that line between birdie and bogey closer together, I think is where the magic is, because that's where the enjoyment is. You want people to be able to take on more heroic shots, be able to take on more aggressive lines. And previously with the narrow corridors, you were basically just forced on some holes to play a certain line. And I mean, one hole comes to mind, the 8th hole. It's a pretty much 90-degree dogleg left. And previously, you were forced to play out to the right off the tee. And then you pretty much, only the really, really hot players could get to the green in 2. So most people, it was a blind shot for your second into the wind, 220 yards, because of where you were forced to play to off the tee. So, so far to the outside corner of the dogleg. So that basically meant everyone was making 5. Then we took out a line of trees. This is years ago, well before this project started. We took out a line of trees on the left of the carry in exposing the left-hand side of the corner. And we had a lot of complaints from people to say, oh, well, you're making the course easier. And people take more aggressive lines now down the left, and they get into way more trouble. Yes, occasionally people do manage to execute the shot and set up birdie chances, but a lot more of them fail to execute and end up in trouble. So I don't think there's ever really an issue giving people more space. You think of the 10th hole at Augusta, if you gave them another 100 yards to the right, it doesn't really make a difference. The pros are still trying to hook the ball 5 yards off the left-hand tree line.
Yeah. Bledge, have you seen in the industry people sort of embracing this more as a thing, or is it still a question then of resource allocation and how much space and how many? Because if you're mowing 8 hectares ish of fairway here,
8 hectares just now with some 25 yard wide fairways, but it's not something. It's not something you massively see in restorations just now, from greenkeeping side anyway, unless you get an architect involved. But like, we're not really trying to push things out in a lot of cases.
You talk about fairway width.
Yes, exactly, because you're looking at more diesel, more man hours, staff hours, and all this kind of adds up more time. But I completely get that side of it from the playability side. But I mean, like, for Hoylake, for example, we're playing through tight, narrow corridors. It's difficult. But I understand you can still make a golf course difficult by pushing the fairways right out, by bunkering it properly.
I think it's really interesting, actually. Like, if you look at historically a lot of the courses of the era where the Addington was built, and the Addington encapsulates some of those philosophies probably better than most. But there were a lot of holes at certain golf courses. There's the straight holes that were never played straight. So I think it's Simpson said of the old course, you'd never play any of those holes straight. And Mackenzie and Spirit at St Andrews, like, you talk about the 4th hole with the little knob thing in front of the green. And I think he just talked about, well, if the pin was just on that little ledge, then Joyce Weatherhead would stick it out towards the cottage bunker and run it in off that left-hand side. If the pin is on the back right thing, then you go out down the right, and the hole can change enormously one day to the other. But the one place that you're not going is straight down the middle, because then you're scuppered whichever way the pin is. And it definitely was the case at Hoylake. It was definitely the case at a lot of these places that holes had appeared straight where people would just stand on the tee and mindlessly smack it straight down the middle. Well, they're going to be, they're the ones who are going to be out of position when they actually get to their ball and realise we're in trouble here. So do you think, Ryan, that those kind of shots that you have now seen over however many years of that weren't possible to play when you started, now they can add enjoyment? And as you say, it can be 120 yards wide, but there might actually only be 20 yards to get to a back right pin that you want to be on the fairway.
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand with the green expansions as well, because you know everything you just explained there. If you're able to push the pins into corners, then it's much more relevant where you're coming in from.
Yeah.
If you want to try and get close to those pins. And so you know if you just had flat surrounds, flat greens, then it probably wouldn't matter. But where you do have a bit of movement and you can push the green expansions out, and this is why you've got to do it all together. The fairway expansions go hand in hand with the green expansions. It goes hand in hand with trying to get the greens firmer, because then the angles you're coming in from are more relevant because the ball is bouncing more rather than just stopping wherever you hit it. I mean, I think I remember watching on Sky the Open at Carnoustie, and I think the previous US Open had been at Shinnecock. And at Shinnecock, they'd had all the pins right in the middle because they more or less lost the greens. And at Carnoustie, the greens were relatively slow, and they were able to get the pins sort of 2 yards off the bunkers.
Yeah.
And actually, those pin positions were way more difficult than they had been at Shinnecock, even though the greens at Shinnecock were far more treacherous. And being able to get the flag close to the edges of the greens, it's not something you do every day. And this is what, when I talk about some of these crazy green expansions that we've got. I mean, Abercrombie, unusually as well, seem to have these individual pin locations as extensions, small extensions to the main body of the green, and all of them generally sit sort of in the surrounding mounding. So they act like sort of miniature punch bowls, but just sort of 5-foot areas of green. And those are where all the fun is, because previously they were just lost in the rough. And as we're pushing the green out into those areas, you basically can chip the ball into banks, which then funnel the ball into those areas. And that's just way more fun. But also, if you're trying to get there, in one or from a good distance, it's also a lot harder.
Yeah.
So it's harder for the better player, and it's in a way more forgiving for the easy player, because if he's up and around the green, then sort of chipping into those banks, it almost gives him a bigger target.
And is that something you get involved in as well when you're walking around or playing, when you see these potential areas of greens that you can grab some extra pins from, and then you'll go to the architect and say, I think we should do this or that, and maybe the same with fairways, etc. How much do you get involved in the architecture?
Well, so I have been very involved in that, in terms of whether it's that iterative a process. I think a lot of it we really were aware of from the very beginning, and it was I remember walking the fairways with Frank Pont in November, must have been 2020. It was lockdown, and we were designing our irrigation system, and we walked the course, and he had sort of georeferenced the old 9447 aerials, and we were able to then flag those old GPS locations, all the original mowing lines on the ground, and the course was closed. So Frank, I think, ended up spending over that November. We got special dispensation from the government for him to be here as essential work, because I don't think he was allowed to fly at the time. But we got him over, and he spent 8 days in total. And we walked the golf course several times and had all those flags on the ground. And basically, every time we walked the course, we might tweak areas, and we discussed. And one good example was the fifth. Was that it was a bogey 5 back in the day. It's a sort of 440 par 4 today, and it had the fairway used to bulge in areas and then narrow in others, and it used to bulge in areas where the average hitter used to hit in the 1920s, then pinch where the big guy used to hit in the 1920s, then widen out again where the average guy was hitting his second shot laying up. Now today, that second widening was more or less where the big guys were landing it. So the sort of pinching was wrong there, and you could see that clear as day on the ground when all the flags were there. So we moved the flags around where we, tweaking it where we thought was appropriate for today. And then those were all then GPSed again and put onto a master plan that the irrigation was then designed to. So all of the fairways, I would say, were kind of done at the beginning. And then we did, as the irrigation system was going in and more tree removal was done, we have added more areas where we think we need to make tweaks. And in terms of the greens are more or less all surrounded in either mounds or drop-offs. And what we saw from those old aerials was that anywhere on our greens that you see mounds or drop-offs, the green went out to. And we can't really take them beyond those areas because they're quite severe mounds and drop-offs. So what Frank's really taught me is that anytime you do have any undulation around the green, if you can get the green into those areas, the short grass into those areas, even though it might not be pinnable, it's more playable because the ball's going to run off it more. But visually, the whole green looks so much more dramatic. I mean, we've gone from having what visually it just looked like these sort of amoeba-shaped greens, quite boring flat circles, to the same greens. We haven't reshaped anything, and they look incredible, like with a whole variety of shapes and sizes. And that's really just by mowing the greens out into those surrounding slopes.
And do you know off the top of your head the hectareage of greens and fairways, what they were and what they've gone to now?
I can't remember what the fairways were, but the fairways are now 13 hectares.
Wow, that's a good amount.
No, bear in mind that's a 6 par 3s.
Mm-hmm.
So the greens were 0.67 hectares,
small,
and they're now 1.3.
Right. Okay.
So, right, I guess they've doubled.
Over double.
Mm-hmm. No, 1.3 is the same as Hoylake, so
right,
to give you an idea.
Yeah. It's certainly not all pinnable. I mean, that's one of the issues with having an old golf course, is that those greens are some of them at, the third comes to mind, 4 or 5% slopes, and green speeds have got a lot faster. We've had some conversations about what to do about that, whether we'd ever reshape any of them just so that they were. I mean, Clates was there one day last summer. We had some members putting to the third green, and none of them could basically stop the ball by the hole, because it's an old green, it's stimping at 10 or whatever it is, and it can be very, very difficult. So yeah, those are issues we're looking at, and we'll eventually decide what to do with that. But there's no right answer there.
What's it been like working with Clates and Frank and Mike DeVries as well? Because 3 different styles, one sort of philosophy, as I mentioned last week. So how have you found it from your perspective?
I've loved every minute of it. It's been great. I think I've probably always had an issue with the idea that if you ever work with one architect, you're kind of really just dealing with one person's opinion, and there's no one perfect architect in the world. So having a team of guys that all have different backgrounds and different views is great, and having them all on site, and I mean, DeVries has got incredible shaping experience, and the courses he's built, like Kingsley, Cape Wickham, unbelievable golf courses. One of the best architects in the world. Clates with his playing experience, still caddies for very high level players. They all bring something different, and it's great to be able to draw on different people's expertise and have that kind of collaboration. We look at Pine Valley regularly talked about #1 course in the world, and it's I don't think it's any coincidence that was a collaboration from a lot of architects having input.
And with an owner who had ideas and made it happen. So.
Yeah. And Harry Colt apparently having sort of accepting or realizing he had a very, very heavy hand there. So we're in good company.
Is there anything that you would have loved to have done that you've not been able to, through whatever reason, like a change?
There's nothing we haven't been able to do that isn't, there's nothing that is planned that we've just been told no and we've had to scrap. It's more things that we're hoping to do that haven't yet happened. So the first thing that came to mind when you were saying that was the clubhouse. So the course was designed in 1913, and the clubhouse, it was designed to start off the 5th hole, which is at the center of the golf course. And we've got a plan marking the clubhouse site and a drawing, a sort of an artist's impression of what the clubhouse would look like from 1917, with the clubhouse at the top of the hill in the center of the site overlooking London. Now, 1919, the World War I's over, the course opens, and the club's so popular, they built this second golf course over the road. If they'd have built the clubhouse in the center of the site then, it would have been miles away from that second course. So they never built the clubhouse where they originally wanted to. And as a result, they rerouted the original golf course to start from the bottom of the hill next to this clubhouse they built that was equidistant between the two courses. Now, that second golf course they built over the road got compulsory purchase during World War II for housing. Yeah. So we're now left with that original golf course, but the clubhouse location at the bottom of the hill and the starting hole being the first today, an uphill par 3, which I don't have any issue with that, but the course just flows so much better from the 5th. And one of my ambitions is to relocate the clubhouse at the top of the hill. The one we've got now is quite outdated. I think it was the Artisans Clubhouse when the original one burnt down in the 50s. They just moved into the Artisans Clubhouse and then extended it. So we're in a location that's a bit awkward. We're sort of sandwiched between the road and the second hole. So we hope to build a new clubhouse at the top of the hill, views of London, but importantly, route the golf course off the fifth hole.
It would be an old kind of fashioned style clubhouse to suit the golf course.
Yeah, I don't know that yet. We're currently interviewing architects, but that was one of the things I've said to them is that we if we build something to look traditional, I think it could end up just being pastiche. And anywhere I've seen someone try and do a traditional building that is new, it doesn't really look right. But the golf course ideally would have its original clubhouse and it would be a traditional building. But because I don't think we could, it's just a very high risk strategy trying to make something look old and do it well. It basically never comes off. So, but the alternative, doing something modern, could be a real clash with the golf course. So it's very difficult to know what the right answer is there and what sort of middle ground there is. And we were talking about this earlier, Sam, where I think it'll come down to materials and probably using a lot of natural materials, a lot of wood, and probably nat flint, which is quite a local material. Mm-hmm. But at the moment I'm sort of putting myself in the architect's hands and letting them figure that one out, because that's, again, it's not my expertise.
It's interesting you said about, that specific position, which would just be the most ridiculous view into London.
Yeah.
Taking down the trees, we talked about how it has improved the strategy of the golf course, how it's improved the agronomy of the golf course. But for anyone that goes and plays the Addington now, those views looking down into, across to the Shard and to Canary Wharf and all of those views, you wouldn't be able to have seen them 2 years ago, would you?
No. And I mean, we had two holes, 16 and 14, where you could see the Shard. And then the right side of 16 opened up, and then you started to see Canary Wharf. And then the left side of 14 opened up and you saw Wembley. And you can see the arch when the sun hits it. And then you see the Millennium Stadium, or the O2 now, showing my age. And the front nine was always one we never had views from. And then we started to see London from the front nine, and we thought, all the drama was on the back nine. Now the front nine's dramatic. And then the north side of the front nine started to get thinned out, and we started to see views for miles there of the North Downs. And now all of a sudden you've got panoramic views almost in every direction. And we're thinking, the front nine didn't have any drama, and now it's arguably every bit as dramatic as the back nine. Everything's been elevated, and oh my God, all of a sudden we've got this hilltop site we never really realised. We're the highest spot for basically as far as you can see in every direction. We never really knew.
Mm-hmm. And the final thing, or the other thing then, just to complete the quadrilateral of benefits from having done that tree management project, the ecology as well, because I was speaking a couple of weeks ago to an ecologist about the benefits of sort of heathland versus woodland, and I guess that any heathland site, if it's just left to its own devices, if there isn't a fire every so often and whatever, is just going to turn into woodland, which of course has great value for the for ecology and for everything else. But heathland is something that's got to be managed and has a higher level and the high benefits again as well. So have you found, working with the Forestry Commission and the consultants, that's been a real positive?
So there are different statutory bodies with different objectives, and the Forestry Commission manages woodland. And if you're dealing with heathland, then you're probably talking to someone like Natural England. So it's a bit sort of, there's a box for each one, and you deal with the relevant statutory body. But certainly what we've seen is that where we have removed trees, the seed bed of the original heathland has come back. A lot of the heather's coming back. We are bringing in seed to try and bring it back as well. But from an ecological point of view, you said it. If you do nothing, heathland's a semi-natural site. It's basically man-made. It's where animals or humans have basically kept the forest back, and heather has either been cultivated or just grows on its own. But it's the only habitat in the UK that can sustain all 6 of our native reptilian species. There's very, very few sites in the world that can sustain lowland heath. basically every single site can sustain woodland. So if you have a site that can sustain lowland heath, it's arguably of far greater value to have that as lowland heath than it is as woodland. But there is a bit of an education process that has to happen to that, because I think a lot of the public probably don't realise that, and there are enormous benefits to heathland. Not only just public enjoyment. If you've got a heathland site to walk in it with dogs, whatever, I would argue it's probably a bit more safer than being enclosed in a woodland area. But I think the public generally are quite averse to the idea of any tree removal. So yeah, there's a bit of an education process, which is something we're working on. We deal with our neighbours and we try and tell them exactly what we're doing and explaining to them the benefits. And it's been good to see people come up to the site that have never been on site and they've lived there for 25 plus years. And during lockdown, we opened up the site to our neighbours, and we had neighbours come on and said, I just never realised how beautiful this place was. And I've been local here for decades and I've never been here.
You can't beat a heathland. I mean, I think some of the most stunning golf courses I've ever seen, Sunningdale, Hankley Common. I mean, some of the heath in Hankley is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. Have you seen much heather take then since you've been scraping around underneath the trees?
Yeah, in places. So right of the 6th has come back with heather and we haven't put any down. Right of 16 we always knew was going to be difficult, and we actually brought heather. We went and cut from a donor site in West Sussex and put down heather brashings last year. That all germinated, quite surprisingly not surprisingly, that's what it was meant to do, but it was just nice to see that
it takes a long time usually, doesn't it? That's the thing. I mean, I helped build G West up at Gleneagles and did loads of heather brashing, and literally 2-3 years in, you start to get the proper plants going through. It takes a while.
So we used an ecologist, and he was saying that, I mean, you're really waiting for the right spring. So you could put the seed down, and then if you don't get the right spring for 5 years, maybe you don't get germination for 5 years. Or also the seed could be dormant and you don't know how long it's going to take to come out of that. So we seem to have got lucky. It all germinated, but then there was no rain from basically May until August. And then a lot of that germinated seed probably got knocked on its head. There are areas there that have taken, but it's reassuring to see that, like, where we've put seed down, it is actually taking, because I think it's not every site you could just put heather seed down and then see it germinate.
Oh, you're looking for right pH, right ground conditions, weather conditions. All the planets seem to have to align to grow heather. It's very, very difficult. There was one thing kind of glossing back to when we were talking about the views of the Shard that I really want to ask you. Can you see the Addington from the Shard?
That is on my list of things to do.
I was thinking that would be that's the ultimate box ticket.
Only one of you needs to go up there, or be at one of us needs
to be dined up there, Ryan.
With
I'll be dined up there.
1 million candle watt power torch and shine it into the sky.
It's interesting talking about the heather brushings and taking the things away, because another thing, must be a challenging site to manage with the gravel. Is gravel the right word for what?
Yeah, it's basically pure gravel. Anywhere you just remove grass, it's gravel.
Yeah, and that must come up, and as you've taken away years and years and years of leaf mulch as well when that's fallen. And how has that been? And how has that been to sort of manage and play on and
Yeah, so fortunately, I think and this is one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit, where anywhere we've removed trees, we've removed the leaf mulch build-up over decades of leaves dropping, because the heather wouldn't grow there because it's too rich, or probably more accurately, the other grasses would outcompete the heather. And so we've scraped those areas, trying not to scrape too deep so that we can actually keep that heather seed bed there. But those areas are predominantly gravel and bare gravel in places, so there is a concern, or was a concern, that are you going to ground your club in there and it's going to be like playing off stone? Fortunately, any plants that have grown grass or heather, there seems to be enough of a body above the gravel for it to not actually be noticed while you're hitting a club through it, which I think it makes sense, because I mean the whole site was gravel and they just seeded it. I mean, they didn't top dress the whole site. That would have been a monumental feat. But we've got photos during construction, and it is just bare gravel everywhere. And anywhere you really scrape, an inch of turf off, you just get to gravel. But you don't feel that when you hit a golf shot. So fortunately, any grass coming through, we don't really have to worry about the stones.
Sam would feel it. You would feel it with your angle of attack.
Yeah, steep.
Mm,
All right,
definitely.
in summer.
But it's amazing where grass grows. I mean, we
Yeah.
used to sow. We had very stony soil up the road at Gleneagles, G West, and it was amazing where the grass would grow.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it grows in paving slabs, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Moving forward for the Addington, one thing I'd also like to discuss is where you see it in the future, golf tournament wise. What kind of events would you like to host, and where do you see it 5-10 years from now?
So, I mean, I've always believed strongly that it's one of the best golf courses in the world, and I'm saying it on a podcast now, but I try not to say it too often because it's I don't want it to be jinxed at all. But I've played a lot of golf around the world, and I just don't see many places like it. And I think I've heard it from enough people now. I'm sort of more comfortable saying it out loud. But yeah, I think World Top 100 golf course is eminently achievable. If you look at the other golf courses that would be in that category, it doesn't seem so outlandish. Where if we were rubbing shoulders with, say, a conversation about what would be the best inland course in the UK, not to say that it was, but to say that it would be in a bracket with others, say Sunningdale, Swinley Forest, St George's Hill, Walton Heath, Woodall Spa, Woking, West Sussex,
Hollandwell, Ganton.
Yeah, so if you're in that group, you're basically top 30 in the UK, which puts you top 100 in the world. I mean, the UK golf is incredible on, relative to worldwide golf courses, but so I don't think it's crazy to think that we could get into the World Top 100. And then in terms of tournaments, I mean, I think there is we're obviously never going to host the British Open. There's a limited amount of infrastructure that we could put on site. It's not the biggest site, but certainly like some high level amateur events. We'd never host the British Amateur because we would if they let us, but it's always on a links golf course. The English Amateur, I think we probably could. The thing that is probably for me would be the crowning achievement. It's certainly something I've got my sight set on in say 20 years time. I think it would be the perfect venue for the Walker Cup.
Yeah.
I watched the Walker Cup at Seminole, and it just struck me that with us being so close to London, the topography, it's the perfect.
It's a match play course.
It is
It's
a match play golf course. Yeah, which is why I think amateur golf is probably better for. But yeah, if we could host the Walker Cup, we could certainly host some senior events, some ladies events would be great. But I think the Walker Cup would be once the course is done, that's what I'd set my sights on.
And the Walker, I'm just thinking back, the Walker's been on, generally in Britain it's been to links, but Ganton had the Walker Cup, didn't they?
Yeah.
So there's definitely sort of
there seems to be less of like a links tie to that than there would be for the
and then especially when you think of the American clubs that have hosted it as well.
Never usually in links, are they?
Well, in America.
Mm.
Well, no, they don't really have links courses.
I think the severity of the... I mean, Royal St George's comes to mind where they get complaints about the sort of unfairness of the bounce. And I think the topography is severe where I like to think it would probably give our boys an edge.
Yeah, a bit of home advantage.
Yeah.
A bit of unfair and fairness.
Yeah. Well, what a location for it as well, South London.
Yeah, that would be...
It'd be great to bring the Walker Cup to South London. We need to make it happen.
Well, I admire your hunger for it, and it's really inspiring. I think you'll kind of agree, Sam, that it's great to listen to you. How much zest you've got for it, and your optimism and positivity for it. It's contagious, definitely, and I think it can happen. You can make anything happen. How far you've come in the last however many years is pretty awesome. It's only just starting, really.
Trajectory is still ongoing as well.
You still get as much zest.
One last thing I'd like to ask, because Mike DeVries was there. Was it last year when he built the short game area?
It would have been August 2021.
Yeah.
So
I remember, because it was before I got involved really with CDP, but still sort of around the edges. And it was interesting looking at how you and Ed and Mike and Frank sort of went about building that short game area, because often you see short game areas and they're very nice and they're beautiful and they're bunker here and swale there and whatever, but you seem to go out and say, right, these are the shots that you hit on the golf course. I want to practice them. And I remember you had a list, didn't you? Like this little list of bunker shot below the hole, sort of X number of feet and things. And you went out to achieve them, and you almost got them all in, didn't you? So how did that work as a process?
So I had this idea that we would recreate shots from the golf course, and not in too convoluted or a gimmicky way, but I went out to the members and said, send me every shot on the golf course that you'd like to be able to practice on the short game area. And we had this long list, and I had my own ideas as well. And we, so there was, or someone would say, the right side of the fourth green, and that's like a slightly below the hole chip off short grass over a bunker. And so you'd write that down, and then more or less, actually, if you don't end up with a crazy long list of all these different shots. It's virtually impossible to, it's not like there's an infinite number of shots that you have to recreate. Once you can get sort of side hill lie, uphill, downhill, below the green, above the green, level with the green, short grass, rough, if you can get all those combinations, then you can more or less provide a hell of a lot of variety on a short game area. So yeah, that's what we set out to do. And I think we pretty much got every single one. The difficult one was, it was one I wanted to do, which was the sixth bunker, which is the famous bunker. It's an old quarry, or depending on who you ask, an old bomb crater from the war. But it's probably a 20 feet deep bunker, massive. It's got a bridge over it, so
I've been in there.
Yeah,
I mean, I've got.
So I said to DeVries, I want to recreate this bunker, and I think he was a bit apprehensive about it, and so he started making it, and it was just. I remember going there every day, and it was never deep enough, and so I just said keep digging, and then fortunately, because we hit this pocket of clay, and we were worried about how we were going to drain it, because it was basically the lowest point. It wasn't going out anywhere. So, but fortunately, we get through this pocket of clay, and we just hit pure white sand. So it was perfect. But yeah, so we've got this very deep crater bunker. That actually, fortunately, the back of it doesn't have so the face is up to the short game green. The back of it goes out over the practice hole, so you can actually hit long shots from that bunker. So it's become a very versatile area. It's not open yet, but it'll be open in the spring.
I just thought it was fascinating to show, like, with some serious thought, how you can have something that adds that much value to the overall property, because that will actually be used.
Yeah, the other point was that we did think about was how much of. I've been to some short game areas where they just go way OTT on like the RT kind of just there's not a flat lie out there, and you could it's an important balance. I think you got some guys that are going to stand there and go, right, I just want to practice my technique today. I need a flat lie, and I've got a flat bit of green with a bit of run out where I can just kind of work out how I'm hitting it or what technique I'm using. And then conversely, you want guys that are like, I need a green that's sloping 5% away from me over a bunker or off a tight lie, and I just want to work on some quirky stuff that I see out there on the golf course. And so you need to strike that balance, because if you just go for the technical stuff, you're going to have an absolutely dead flat green that's got no character whatsoever. And you go too far the other way, and I think no one really gets anything out of practicing on it because it's just so convoluted. Mm-hmm. And I have seen greens like that, not going to name any of them, but yeah, so I think we have struck a really good balance, and nicely actually, you get more of that kind of more technical, like flatter areas as you enter it, and it gets a bit more adventurous as you sort of walk through it. And one of the things DeVries did actually, we were planning one big green. He split them into two, so we've now got this sort of more severe far green at the back, which is again, as you move into that short game area, it gets a bit more dramatic.
So what's left for this winter then? A few more bunkers?
Yeah, so we've got 4 bunker phases. This is the first phase. We were going to do them each autumn, October, November, about 6 weeks of work for 4 years. This one is holes 18 and 1 to 5, 14 bunkers. And next year will be holes 13 to 17. So we've just lined the ones on 18. I think the project should be another 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, they're working out really well. We've pushed the sand lines up a lot higher. We've dropped the entrances where there's a lot of sand splash that's built up over the years. Where they're into greens, we've taken the sand splash down and taken the greens into the bunkers more. Taking the fairways back into the bunkers. It's massive improvement visually to the holes as well, but playability wise, restoring those old sizes. The bunkers were much bigger than they were than they were, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to go for my next visit and not recognise it yet again.
Yeah, we're waiting for the invite back. There's one thing something a bit silly that I just wanted to discuss. When I was in your clubhouse last, seeing loads of pictures of Ronnie Corbett.
Yeah.
Ronnie Corbett, celebrity member, family friend.
Yeah, no, he was. Him and Dad were close, and his wife she's moved out of her house actually, but she now lives on the first carry at Muirfield.
Oh, so right. Well, this will tie this story in nicely, and I really wanted to tell you this. But when I worked at Gillen, Sam.
Gillen. Oh, don't ask me.
Gullen all day long.
We said no.
Maybe
politics.
we should have voted.
We said no politics on the pod.
One of the guys I worked with at Gullen told me that he saw Ronnie Corbett and Clint Eastwood in the Gullen Spa shop, and Clint was carrying the basket. And every time I see Ronnie Corbett or picture him in your clubhouse, it just brought it all flooding back, and I thought that's absolutely fantastic. So
yeah, he was great.
What a legend, eh?
Yeah, he I think Anne was telling me a story where she was badgering him about something, and pardon the pun. And he apparently they were in bed, and it was like 11 p.m. He's trying to get some sleep, and he just says, "For Christ's sake, women, will you shut up? I've got to play Lee Trevino in the morning."
That's so good.
Brilliant. Well, Bledge, have you got any more questions?
No, I'm done now. I just
think get back down the road.
Yeah, no, we'll let them travel back. It's a long drive home, but
yeah.
What a guest to have on! Like massively interesting, and you'll never meet a bigger badger than yourself. So like we're delighted to have you on. We said from the start when we drew up a dream list of guests that you were at the top of it. So we're really happy to have you on.
Thank you very much. I'll
so
keep
much
talking if no one tells me to shut up.
I think for the sake of your wife, we better
you're going to be in trouble.
Thank you, guys.
No, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. Well done.